Environments, environments, environments. That's the theme for this week. Hello, you're watching the development vlog for Shokken, a restaurant waitlist management tool soon to be made available on Android and iOS. This is Bill from Shokken, and this is week 61 of development. This week is a bit different than previous weeks, because up until this week, we only had alpha test version available. However, Google just approved the open test track for the app, which means that the beta version of the app is now publicly available. This means testers and potential users can actually find the app through their respective app stores, as opposed to going through the complicated enrollment and permission acceptance steps before they can test the app. What this also means is that the backend that I have needs to be in shape to receive production data. In other words, this is now, we have gone from baby suckling on the teats of the mother to whiskey. Things need to be ready. Security needs to be in place. The guardrails around the abuse and whatnot also need to be in place. In addition to those things, I needed to spin up multiple environments for my future development workflow. Now, to be clear, up until this moment, my app only had one backend. That one backend is my integration backend, it's my staging backend, and it was also my production backend. So the users who've been testing the app, as well as the one user who started using the services last week, were actually using one backend. Not very ideal, as you can imagine, because when I'm doing the continuous integration, if I make any changes to the backend, the changes get deployed directly onto the one backend that I have. And if I break something, it breaks production. People who are using this app would not be able to use the app anymore because the backend is broken. This means I need multiple backends. And after some research and some deliberation internally, I've settled on actually 3 persistent backends. We have the production backend, which is the backend that services live traffic. That's understandable. And then we have the integration backend, which is the backend that continuously updates as soon as you push anything onto the master branch, the trunk branch. So that backend is the sort of the live backend that replicates the current situation on my GitHub repo. And then the last backend, the last persistent backend, is the staging backend. The staging backend is the backend that's in between the integration backend and the production backend. Staging backend becomes the staging backend by promotion from the integration backend. And then after it becomes the staging backend, the changes freeze until the next promotion. And the users would then, and the testers and the users would then use their alpha and beta version of the app to test against that particular staging backend. And once the staging backend becomes reliable and we don't find anything wrong with it, after a certain period of time, we promote that staging backend to production backend. And the changes deployed to production, and then the production backends receive the changes that were emitted into the staging backend. That's the 3 backend setup: integration, staging, and production. That sounds easy. It sounds, oh, we have 3 backends. Just go ahead in the Supabase branch page, create those backends, and then you're good to go. That's what I thought. Turned out to be quite a bit more complicated than this. And what's also very interesting is that the previous company that I worked for, gigantic multinational corporation, didn't really have a proper staging backend. I believe we had an integration backend that kept breaking because people kept pushing stuff to it, which is understandable. But for whatever reason, we didn't have a staging backend with reliable data and structure that we can test our front-end apps against. So I, at that moment, sort of just wrote it off as, big companies are going to do big company things and they're not going to do the best practice. But it turns out that spinning up and maintaining multiple different backends is no trivial task. And to illustrate the difficulties that I ran into, I'm just going to sort of mention a couple things that struck me. To spin up parallel Supabase database backend, it's fairly straightforward. You can do it through Supabase CLI using the command line interface. You can use the web UI. You go to the Supabase branches and you put in the branches that you want, and voila, you have spawned multiple different environments. And then you can make those environments you can change those environments from preview environments to persistent environments so that they can't get overwritten and they can't be reset. They serve as, again, the persistent environments that your users can test against. That's easy. The problem, though, is you have a lot of other services that are attached to your backend. Number one, I have Supabase Auth. Specifically, I use the native social authentication provided by Supabase. On Android, I use Android native login using the Google login. On iOS, I use Apple login. These would also have to be set up separately within the two additional new environments, the integration and the staging. In other words, you'd have to give them the keys, to give them the callback, so that the respective social login backends can call back to your database and then give the login status. That's number one. And the next up is the RevenueCat. RevenueCat is my revenue management backend, which coordinates the purchases from respective app stores, my database backend, as well as the RevenueCat backend. This needs to be set up for the two additional environments as well. And specifically, they distinguish between production traffic and sandbox traffic. So you're going to make sure that the traffic flows correctly from sandbox RevenueCat to your integration and staging backends of your Supabase, and the production data coming from RevenueCat has to flow correctly back into your production Supabase backend. Otherwise, you might have the situation where people are buying stuff with real money, but then only their staging environment gets changed, or vice versa, if they don't spend any money and then they get entitlements within the production database. So that needs to be set up correctly. And then I ran into the web situation. I have a website. The website actually pulls my backend because I have a live QR code on a website for potential users to scan and see what it would feel like to be a customer of this app, to be a user being served by this app. And that comes from my backend, which means my website deployment now would also have to have environments built in. In other words, the three environments, right? You can't mix and match different tiers with different tiers of backend. So the website deployment has to be set up in terms of backends as well. So as you can see, that one simple idea of spinning up multiple backends sort of exploded into the complexity of, I don't know how many tickets I created. I probably created about a dozen tickets just to go through all those things and then hook them up correctly and then test them correctly. And not only that, this is not to mention, up until this moment, I've only talked about the Supabase backend, my server backend, the auth, the databases, the edge functions, and all of that. With those backends, you also have to match them up with your app build variants, right? Your production app cannot be pointing towards anything but your production backend, which means that the keys need to be set correctly, which means that the path needs to be set correctly. And for all these things to happen, one of the biggest and most helpful tools that GitHub provides is the environments. So last week, I spent so much time and a lot of effort into setting up all the different GitHub environments, such that when my GitHub workflow deploys into those various environments, as well as different versions of the app, they can fetch the correct secrets and environment variables from those environments, so that I don't have to worry about renaming those things or a lot of that crap. The other thing that I discovered is that for a lot of those secrets, I have once you put the secrets into GitHub, you can no longer retrieve it, at least not in the official way. I understand that there is a infamous workflow out there that you can run, but I don't want to really do that. So to transfer my secrets and environment variables from my GitHub repo level secrets environments into the environment level secrets environments, that was another, I wouldn't call it ordeal. That took a little bit of effort to think about and to come up with a workflow to make that happen as well. So that also needed to happen last week. And I think up until now, today, which is the Thursday that I'm recording this, I'm mostly done with the transitioning. And I have also tested the promotional path from integration to staging. However, I haven't attempted the promotion path from staging to production because I do not yet have a production situation yet, because production is tied to the final release of the app publicly on the Play Store as well as the iOS App Store. That hasn't happened yet. But the last part I think I am still working on that I need to make sure that it works is the web deployment. At this point, I don't think the web deployment is working yet for the different environments, because it turns out that I hard-coded the paths, the URL paths, into some of the logic that I used. I had one subdomain for the join queue, the join URL when you visit the website. I had another subdomain for the status display of the website. And the way that my edge function can determine which path you're on is by parsing your URL. Problem with ephemeral or preview branches, and the different backends that we talked about, the URLs are going to be different because you're not going to use the same URL for your different integration and staging backends and environments. So these need to be fixed as well. I just registered a couple new subdomains to use for this purpose, and then these need to be accounted for within my edge function that serves the front end on the website. There's a lot of moving parts. This is I can sort of finally understood and have a bit more appreciation from a previous company why they didn't have a proper staging environment. But also at the same time, this is one thing that you cannot not do if you want to have a robust development workflow such that your development flow doesn't break production, or you don't introduce unnecessary friction for a lot of tests that could have been avoided if you had a staging environment. So it's understandable, but I think it's inexcusable, right? You still have to do it. And of course, all those environments are not cheap. As soon as you spin up multiple different environments and all the different backends, you start paying money for those environments. So the costs are actually stacking up now. Initially it was like, oh, you sign up for a free account, and then you start developing. It's going to make you feel good. It did make me feel good, to be fair. But now, when you're getting serious, you want multiple environments. You've turned your GitHub. That's another thing I did last week. I turned my GitHub from an individual account to an organizational account, such that I can implement the change control mechanisms as well as approval and promotion mechanisms, such that I'm protecting myself from accidentally pushing onto the production promotional branch. So I've removed my ability to push directly to the production branch. Now, to be clear, that's not the master branch. I'm using trunk-based development. I'm not using Git flow. In other words, master doesn't reflect production. I have a separate production branch that deploys to production. Well, actually, I have multiple separate production branches because each branch deploys into a separate target: the Supabase target, Android target, iOS target, web target. Yeah, I think I have 4 targets. That's about right. Whereas the master is the integration branch, the trunk branch, the equivalent of the developer branch in the Git flow workflow. In any case, this is it's going to be an ongoing battle and situation. And not only that, after this week and next week, after I finish implementing all the different backends, I myself would take a little bit of time to get used to the new protocol that I've put in place. The approval process, even if it is just me myself, the audit process, the code review process, and all of those. It's no longer just as easy as push directly to master. Voila, it's deployed and staging. Let's go test it out. I'd still have the luxury because now I have the proper integration branch that I can test against. But again, going from integration to staging to production, there's now a strict workflow. And on the one hand, this is a lot of red tape that I just created for myself. On the other hand, I don't know if you've been on the internet recently, or that particular corner of the internet where people say, vibe coded apps, secrets leak, database information leak, app doesn't work properly, app just hooked up to the wrong website, database is wide open. These are the very security problems that this very rigid promotion flow and review flow is helping to mitigate. To be clear, the process that I'm putting in place this week and next week isn't going to necessarily completely prevent these things from happening, because security is an ongoing challenge. But this does make it more difficult for it to happen. For instance, in my promotion workflow, from every stage, again, from integration to staging, that's one promotion. From staging to production, that's another promotion. There are two promotions that need to happen between integration to production. Within those two promotions, this is not just like, you look good, let's promote you. No. I have all the tests in there, going from as easy as build verifications for the apps, as well up to the moment of security audits, as well as Git leaks and checking all the security keys, as well as the RLS, the row level security from my database backend enforcement, and a custom logic to audit the database security. In other words, like, should this table be accessible via an anon key? If it shouldn't, then tell me, right? So infrastructure, security, and everything has been the focus for last week and this week. So that's been last week. I did a lot of, I stayed up quite a lot last week to get some, to make new milestones every day. But it's been quite fun. Next week, I'm going to continue to. Next week, I hope to wrap up this transition from single environment to triple environment, and then solidify all the processes in place. In addition to that, I'm going to fix a couple of things in the pricing model for my app, using the RevenueCat, as well as making changes in my code such that when people pull up the paywall, they understand what they're buying, they understand what they're spending their money on. To be clear, though, this app offers very, very generous free use in terms of functionality. Like, you can use the QR code. I'm not going to charge you anything, right? Just use it. Sure, incur some costs on my end, but I think I can tank that. But if you want more reliability, if you want SMS notifications, that's when you'll buy the packages within the RevenueCat, and remit proceeds towards me. Because as soon as you start sending messages, it's going to cost a lot of money on my back end to support that. This logic, this in-app purchase logic, needs to be improved. There's a lot of improvements that can be made on that front, and that would be another full focus for next week too. So to summarize, last week, transitioning from a single environment to triple environment, and the upcoming week, the goal is to complete that transition and then finish up the polish on the in-app purchases in the app. And then as soon as that's done, submit for production access on both Google Play Store and iOS App Store. And in the meantime, after the submission goes through, submissions are submitted. It takes a little while to go through after submissions are submitted. I'm going to go back to working on marketing materials for those apps, and perhaps update the screenshots on those on my apps, such that the app listing can be more enticing. That's the App Store optimization ASO stuff that people keep talking about. A lot of stuff. And the funny thing is, for a few weeks now, I really haven't been doing heavy product development or coding. It's a lot of marketing, business side of things, and infrastructure, things that the end users don't necessarily see, but you have to do. Isn't that funny? Like, when you're making a product, you think that you spend most amount of your time making the product. That's actually not true. And even for this, which again, I haven't taken any money yet. In other words, this is well before revenue. Even for this, it's probably 30%, or maybe 50% on development, and the rest of the 50% are on stuff that are around it. Fascinating, I know. These are the fun things that you learn when you try to do it yourself. Anyways, this is it for this week. I will see you next week.